Welcome to Christian Podcast. Today we are discussing the intersection of Christianity and humanism, looking specifically through the lens of the book, The Pursuit of Humanism.
That's right, and it's a fascinating book because it doesn't just tell the story of humanism in isolation.
No, exactly. What really jumps out is how Christianity keeps appearing in different ways throughout humanism's development.
Absolutely. The book presents it in several key roles, doesn't it?
It does. It talks about Christianity as the historical background, sometimes as something humanism challenged, sometimes as an interactive partner, and then also as a tradition that some humanists sort of broke away from or tried to find alternatives to.
Right, and it looks at Christian doctrines, the institutions, the church's social influence, and even specific interactions between Christians and humanists. All these aspects are woven into the narrative.
So our mission today is really to dive into these intersections, maybe unpack some of those roles using the really vivid characters and interesting examples the book provides.
Sounds good. It's a complex relationship, definitely worth exploring.
Okay, so let's start with that first role. Christianity as the background. The book basically argues that early humanism didn't just pop up. It developed in a world already deeply shaped by Christian ideas and institutions.
Precisely. Think about the Middle Ages. That's the context. The Renaissance, the humanistic revival emerged from that world, a world where the church's influence was, well, pretty much everywhere.
It wasn't a blank slate they were writing on?
Not at all.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the book points out how the church itself, maybe unintentionally, played a role in preserving the tools humanism needed.
Ah, you mean through employing literate people, secretaries and the like.
Exactly. The church needed people who could read and write. Now, their main goal probably wasn't fostering classical learning like, say, Petrarch wanted.
Right, it was more practical for them.
Yes, but that practical need kept literacy alive, kept those skills going. And those skills were fundamental for the humanists who came later, wanting to engage with ancient texts.
So a sort of foundational role, even if unintended. Okay, let's shift gears to the second aspect. Christianity as an object of challenge. This feels like a more direct kind of interaction.
Yes, and it makes sense. As humanism started emphasizing, human reason, human potential, it was bound to clash with some aspects of established religious frameworks.
Who are some key figures the book highlights here?
Well, Bertrand Russell is a really prominent example. He drew a lot from thinkers like Epicurus and the Enlightenment tradition.
And his view was quite critical, wasn't it?
Very. Russell saw religion, including Christianity, as a major source of fear and anxiety. He felt this actually held people back, stopped them from living bolder, happier, more constructive lives.
Right. So religion as an obstacle to human flourishing.
That was his argument. He wanted people to be more self-reliant, finding happiness through their own efforts, which obviously contrasts sharply with relying on divine grace or authority.
A clear point of tension. The book also mentions a student discussion about defining humanism.
Ah, yes, where one definition contrasted humanism with supernaturalism.
Right. So by setting up that contrast, it implicitly positions Christianity with its supernatural elements as something humanism might inherently reject or define itself against.
Exactly. It highlights a potential fundamental difference in how you understand the world through a purely natural lens or one that includes the supernatural.
And then there's that very old idea from Protagoras. Man is the measure of all things.
That's a classic formulation. And it's a profound challenge to a theocentric or God-centered worldview.
Because it puts humans at the center instead of God.
Pretty much. It suggests human experience and perception are the ultimate reference point. And Protagoras was also famously skeptical about whether we could even know if the gods exist. That really shifts the focus.
Definitely. The book also brings up Baron d'Holbach. He sounds like he had an even stronger take.
Oh, d'Holbach was a committed materialist and atheist. He saw religion as, I think the book calls it, a dark mist.
A dark mist, why?
He believed it generated immense fear, especially the fear of death, and that this fear distracted people from living well and finding happiness in this life, the only life he believed existed.
And didn't he have a personal experience that shaped this view?
Yes. The book mentions a story about a priest visiting his dying wife, and apparently saying things that terrified her. That experience seems to have really solidified his conviction that religious dogma could be actively harmful.
Wow. Okay. That adds a powerful emotional layer to his intellectual stance. So we've seen Christianity as background and as a target. But it wasn't always opposition, right? The book talks about interaction, even partnership.
Yes, and this is where the relationship gets much more nuanced. It's not just black and white.
How so? What are some examples of this interaction?
Well, the book looks at figures like Benedetto Croce and Giovanni Gentile. Both were intellectuals in a broadly humanistic tradition in Italy. And it examines how they responded differently to the rise of Italian fascism, which was, in many ways, an anti-humanist movement, but one that also had complex religious dimensions. Their differing approaches show there wasn't just one humanist way to engage with these powerful, sometimes religiously tinged ideologies.
So even within humanism, there were different strategies for interacting with the surrounding culture, including its religious aspects.
Exactly. And the book makes a broader point, too, that most religions, historically, aren't purely anti-humanist. They often contain humanistic elements within them.
That complicates the simple error versus salvation picture.
It really does. There's even a little anecdote mentioned about Pope Innocent III, a very powerful medieval pope, apparently considering writing a book about human achievements.
Really? That's surprising. It suggests maybe a flicker of recognition for human value, even from the top of the church hierarchy back then.
It hints at it,
Yeah.
certainly. It suggests the boundaries weren't always completely rigid.
And there's that other fascinating example of interaction, the one about the survival of ancient texts.
Ah, yes, the sack of Rome. A disaster for early humanistic manuscripts. Many were destroyed.
Right, a terrible loss.
But then later on, where were many of these texts rediscovered and preserved? In monastic libraries.
So the very institutions of the church ended up safeguarding the classical knowledge that humanists prized.
In many cases, yes.
Yeah.
It shows this complex, maybe unintentional partnership where religious institutions played a vital role in the survival of the very heritage that humanism championed. A real historical irony.
It really is.
Yeah.
Okay, that leads us to the final role the book discusses. Christianity as a tradition to break away from, or at least seek alternatives to.
And this seems like a natural development from some of the challenges we talked about earlier. If humanism emphasizes human reason and classical wisdom, it might lead some to look beyond traditional Christian authority.
Petrarch comes to mind again here, right? His deep dive into Greek and Roman classics.
Absolutely. Petrarch saw these ancient figures almost as moral guides, people who gave him a kind of mission. That focus suggests, potentially, a shift away from relying solely on Christian figures or doctrines for moral exemplars.
A broadening of horizons, perhaps? And then you have Lorenzo Valla, whose work was much more pointed.
Valla's work was incredibly significant. His use of historical and linguistic analysis humanist methods to prove the donation of Constantine was a forgery was a direct hit against the church's claims to worldly power.
That must have caused quite a stir.
Immense. And he didn't stop there. He also went back to the Greek sources for the New Testament, questioning the accuracy of the standard Latin Vulgate translation. That showed a desire to bypass tradition and get back to the originals.
Challenging both political claims and textual authority. And Erasmus followed in his footsteps, didn't he? Though maybe with a slightly different goal.
Yes, Erasmus used Valla's work and shared that desire to return to earlier sources. For Erasmus, it was partly about finding what he saw as a pure form of Christianity, one less entangled with power and corruption.
So he wanted reform within the church.
He did. Erasmus himself didn't break away.
Yeah.
But ironically, his scholarship, his critiques, his emphasis on original texts, all of that provided ammunition for the Protestant reformers who did break away.
Ah, so his internal critique fueled an external separation. Interesting dynamic.
Very much so. And beyond reforming or critiquing Christianity, the book also talks about attempts to create entirely new systems.
Like Auguste Comte's Religion of Humanity.
Exactly, positivism. That was an explicit attempt to build a moral and social framework based purely on science and humanistic ideals, designed to completely replace traditional religions like Christianity.
A secular alternative, essentially. And the search for meaning outside traditional faith, you see it reflected in literature, too.
Yes, the book mentions Mary Augusta Ward's novel, Robert Elsmere. It explores the journey of someone grappling with religious doubt.
And where does the character end up?
Finding meaning in humanistic service and a kind of purely human understanding of Jesus, separate from traditional doctrine. It shows its search for alternative ways to find purpose, sometimes still drawing on Christian figures but reinterpreting them.
And then you get figures who make a much cleaner break, like Robert Ingersoll.
Right. Ingersoll represents a very clear departure. He was an outspoken agnostic, a rationalist, fiercely critical of religious dogma.
What did he advocate for instead?
Focus on this life,
Hmm.
earthly happiness, using reason, making life better for fellow humans. It was a conscious rejection of traditional Christian beliefs. Even though his background, his father was a preacher, meant he knew those beliefs very well.
So, across all these examples, background challenge, interaction, breaking away the book really paints a picture of a long, intricate, and ongoing conversation between humanism and Christianity.
It absolutely does. It shows they haven't just existed side by side. They've constantly shaped, pushed against, and sometimes even unintentionally supported each other over centuries.
Yeah.
It highlights how central both have been to shaping Western thought and culture. It's not a simple story of opposition at all.
Not in the slightest. It's much richer and more complex than that.
Well, this has been a really illuminating discussion, tracing those threads through the pursuit of humanism. It definitely shows the dynamic nature of this relationship.
It's a relationship that continues to evolve even today.
Absolutely. And that actually leads perfectly to the final thought we wanted to leave with you, our listener. Considering these historical interactions we've unpacked today, how do you see the dialogue between Christian thought and contemporary humanistic perspectives playing out, maybe evolving in the future?
That's a great question to ponder. What does that ongoing interaction look like now, and where might it be heading?
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope it sparked some new insights.
Thanks for listening.
Join us next time for another deep dive.